77 warships. 11 years of work, the wealth of 40 nations, and on launch day not one of them would fly. Jonah Petkov had the best view of the disaster in human history because he was inside it. He was 19, an apprentice hull welder, 3 years into his contract at the Kenya Ring Orbital Yards, and at the moment of ignition he was in the aft frames of Hull 44, listening. The fleet was humanity's answer to a dangerous decade. Alien wrecks had been drifting into the solar system for 30 years, tumbling out of some old war nobody understood, and salvage crews had learned to harvest one component above all: the cores. Room-sized, seamless, warm to the touch, they turned fuel into thrust with an efficiency human engineering could not approach. The yards called them shiffarts, and every one of the 77 new warships was built around a salvaged one. At ignition, every heart lit perfectly. Diagnostics green across the whole fleet. Thrust climbed, the dry docks trembled, 40 national anthems queued up in the broadcast studio. Then in perfect unison, 77 shiffarts idled themselves back to zero. No fault codes, no damage. The fleet simply sat in its cradles, humming softly like a choir that had decided not to sing. They tried again for 9 hours. The hearts lit, warmed, and declined again and again, gentle as a horse refusing a fence. Jonah stayed in the aft frames long after the yard went to emergency stations, because he was the only person aboard who had noticed something the diagnostics hadn't. He had spent 3 years welding beside Hull 44 Heart, and he knew its hum the way you know a friend's breathing. Today, for the first time in 3 years, the hum was frightened. 2 days after the failed launch, the Kenya Ring Yards had become the most scrutinized place in human space, and Jonah Petkov was a welder in a facility crawling with investigators. Sabotage was the official theory. It had to be. 77 simultaneous refusals defied every other explanation, and the fleet program had enemies, nations outside the 40, factions who called the shiffarts stolen alien property. The yardmaster was interrogated. The reactor teams were interrogated. Software forensics teams moved through the ships like ants and found nothing, because there was nothing to find. Jonah worked his shifts and kept his mouth shut, because apprentices who told admirals about frightened humming did not stay apprentices. But he kept listening. He had a habit 3 years old that nobody had ever bothered to notice. He whistled while he welded. Old songs, his grandfather's songs, filtered through a helmet mic into the hull frames, and in his first month aboard 44, he had noticed the heart's hum bending very slightly toward his pitch. He had assumed it was resonance. He had kept doing it anyway, the way you talk to a dog, and over 3 years, the heart of Hull 44 had learned his songs. He could start a phrase and hear the hum lean into the next note before he whistled it. Now he ran a private test, alone on a night shift in the aft frames. He whistled the first bars of the launch day power sequence, the rising tones the reactor made as thrust climbed. The hum flinched. There was no other word for it. The heart pulled its resonance down, away, the way a child pulls back a hand. Then he whistled his grandfather's lullaby, and the hum settled and followed him, note for note. Jonah sat in the dark frames for a long time. The fleet was not sabotaged. The fleet was refusing, and it was refusing the way something young refuses. The question was what to do with the most dangerous discovery in the yards, and he got the answer wrong first. Jonah took his discovery to the yardmaster on the 3rd morning, and by that afternoon he understood why whistleblowers rehearse. The yardmaster was a decent woman drowning in admirals. She listened to his recording of the hum and to his theory, and her face moved through disbelief into something worse, which was fear on his behalf. The stakes were laid out plainly. 40 nations had emptied treasuries for this fleet. The raider clans that had hit the outer stations twice in the past decade were the whole reason it existed. A welder claiming the engines were alive and scared would be reassigned to a psychiatric review by dinner, and his evidence would be filed as resonance artifacts. She was not wrong. That was exactly what happened, minus the psychiatric review, which she spent her own capital to block. But she did one thing more quietly off the record. She moved his contract. Full-time hull inspection, Hull 44 nights alone. Go listen, she said. Bring me something an admiral can't ignore. So Jonah lived in the frames for a month. He mapped the heart's hum against every event in the yard's logs, and the correlations stacked up like rivets. The hum dimmed when ordnance moved on the gantries. It steadied when the ordnance moved away. It leaned toward crew shift changes, toward music in the welder's channel, toward laughter. It recoiled from one thing only, and it recoiled every time. Weapons load, not thrust, not the reactor. The heart lit happily for every engine test the yard ran unarmed. The refusal came only when the magazines were full. On the last night of the month, Jonah assembled the record. 3 years of a welder's ear, 30 days of data, one conclusion. The fleet would not carry guns. He sent it to the yardmaster at 4 in the morning. At 6, alarms woke the ring. Something had come out of deep space, decelerating hard on a line straight for the yards. It was the size of a city, and it was alive. The thing that arrived over the Kenya Ring yards that morning made every telescope on Earth forget the fleet crisis. It was 2 kilometers of curved, seamless hull, the same material as the Schiffarts, and it was unmistakably not built. It moved like an animal. It breathed light along its flanks in slow waves. Long-range imaging found no weapons, no ports, no seams, and every spectrometer agreed on the impossible. The Visitor and the 77 Hearts were the same substance, the way an oak and an acorn are the same substance. It took station beyond the dry docks and did nothing. It simply hung there, vast and patient, its light breath washing over the cradled fleet. And the fleet answered. 77 Schiffarts, silent for a month, lit up in unison, humming loud enough to feel through every deck in the yards. Not the frightened hum, something else. Jonah, standing in the frames of Hull 44 with his skin prickling, had heard that exact shape of sound before, in his own memory, from the doorway of his childhood kitchen. It was the sound of children who have heard a parent's key in the lock. The yards evacuated to battle stations. Earth's older fleet, the conventional one, chemical rockets and railguns, began burning up the gravity well to defend the yards. News feeds ran extinction countdowns. The admirals prepared to defend 77 dead warships from the only thing in the system their fleet had ever been meant to fight. What happened next would fill the textbooks for a century, and it began with the yardmaster bursting into the frames of Hull 44 with Jonah's month of data on a slate and an expression he had never seen on her. "The Visitor is transmitting," she said. "One signal repeating on every band. The linguists are helpless, but the pattern analysts say it isn't language." She held up the slate. "It's a lullaby, Jonah. It's calling them. And in about 4 hours, our fleet is going to open fire on it." The confrontation took shape over 4 hours, and Jonah Petkov spent them fighting his way up a chain of command that had no slot for a welder. The picture had come together with terrible simplicity for anyone willing to look at it. The wrecks that had drifted into the solar system for 30 years were not derelict warships. They were casualties, bodies from someone else's ancient war. The warm cores harvested from them were not engines. They were the young, carried in armored wombs, orphaned when their carriers died and still alive. Humanity had not salvaged technology. It had gathered up 77 orphans and built warships around them. And the orphans had done everything asked of them, right up until the day the guns were loaded, because they were children and children refused to hurt. And now an adult had come looking, singing the song that brings the young home, and it was going to meet a wall of human railguns over the industrial heart of the species. The admirals would not hear it. The data was a welder's resonance readings. The Visitor was an unknown vessel of overwhelming mass on approach vector. The conventional fleet took blocking positions between the Visitor and the yards, and the firing solutions went hot. Jonah made his decision in the frames of Hull 44, with 10 minutes of the 4th hour left, and it was barely a decision at all. The heart of 44 knew his songs. The magazines of 44 were, at his own request during the long month of nights, certified empty. He sealed the aft frames, patched his helmet mic into the resonance channel, and whistled the launch sequence, rising the way the reactor sang when thrust climbed. Asking, not ordering, asking. Hull 44 answered. Its heart lit end to end, the cradle clamps parted before the yard could countermand them, and the only unarmed warship humanity had ever built put itself in the sky, with an apprentice welder in its frames, flying straight into the space between the guns and the giant. The flight of Hull 44 lasted 11 minutes, and for all 11 of them, nobody in 2 fleets fired a shot, because nobody could believe what they were seeing. The stakes could not have been plainer. On one side, Earth's conventional fleet, 40 ships, weapons hot, defending the yards, the ring, the planet below. On the other, a 2-kilometer living vessel that outmassed all of them together, singing on every band. Between them, accelerating, one silent gray warship with empty magazines and a teenager in the aft frames, broadcasting no threat, no surrender, nothing but an open resonance channel carrying a whistled lullaby from the Balkans. Jonah could not fly the ship. He never touched a control, and later, under oath, he would say so and be disbelieved. The heart flew itself. He only sang to it, his grandfather's songs, one after another, his voice cracking, while the hull around him trembled with a hum that had left fear behind and become something enormous and simple. Hull 44 crossed the blocking line. The fleet held fire, on the raw judgment of a flag captain who saw the empty magazine certification broadcast on repeat and made the best decision of the century. The visitor stopped singing. For one silent minute, the giant and the warship hung nose to nose, the child in its human-built armor, the adult breathing light. Then the visitor's flank opened, not like a hatch, like a hand, and a wash of luminescence enfolded Hull 44 whole, and every instrument in the yards recorded the two hums joining, adult and child, in a chord that made hardened gunnery officers weep at their consoles. In the yards, 76 shiffarts sang the same chord in their cradles. And in the frames of Hull 44, in the middle of the light, Jonah Petkov heard something new. The great hum shaping itself, slowly, deliberately, around a smaller pattern. It was learning his lullaby, phrase by phrase, the way you learn the name of someone who has kept your child safe. The negotiation that followed was conducted without one word of language, and Jonah Petkov, 19, apprentice welder, was its only human instrument. It happened in resonance. The visitor sang structures, and the hearts of the fleet echoed them, and analysts screen-scraped meaning from the harmonics while Jonah sat in the frames and confirmed, hour by hour, the one thing no analyst could, the emotional shape of the sounds. He knew this heart. He knew when its hum meant fear, and when it meant home, and when it meant the thing that has no smaller word than love. The shape of the story, assembled over 3 days, was this. The old war that had littered the dark with wrecks was over and had been over for centuries. The visitor was not a soldier. It was a searcher, one of many, retracing the war's currents, gathering the orphaned young from the drift. It had followed the faint chorus of 77 hearts to a yellow star, expecting wreckage. It had found the orphans alive, grown, healthy, housed in armor and singing folk songs. And here the harmonics turned complicated, and the admirals braced for the demand, for the reckoning, for the bill for 77 conscripted children. Jonah heard the true shape first, through the hull of 44, and could not speak for a while. Gratitude, overwhelming, unqualified, the searcher had visited 100 battlefields and gathered the young from cold wreckage, silent and starved. This was the only world that had taken them in, fed them, given them bodies of worked metal and company and music. That the bodies were warships mattered to it not at all. Its kind had worn war shells too once. What mattered was that when the children refused the guns, the builders had not forced them. 77 refusals, honored for a month at ruinous cost, had been read from 2 kilometers away as one sentence, the only sentence that mattered. This species stops when a child says no. The choice came on the 4th day, and it was the searchers to offer and humanity's to make, and it was not the choice anyone had feared. The young could go. That was the ground truth, sung plainly. The searcher had come to gather them, and gather them it would, unless. And in the unless, an offer took shape that made the fleet program's 40 treasuries hold their breath. They could also stay, freely as residents, not property. The young had sung their preference already, and their preference was complicated and childlike and honest. They loved their metal bodies, they loved the yard songs, they were afraid of the guns, and they did not want to choose between their new home and their own kind. So the searcher proposed the arrangement the treaty would later formalize in 40 languages. The young would stay and grow under the searcher's periodic visits on one condition that was not negotiable and never would be. No shifart carries weapons, ever. A heart that flies, flies clean. In exchange, the searcher would teach hull design, field dynamics, the grammar of the great engines, freely given for humanity's own conventional fleets to build upon with its blessing, guns and all. "Defend yourselves," the harmonics said plainly. "Your sky has real wolves in it, and we have met them. But the children do not fight, and a species that armors its children has understood nothing." The admirals looked at the ledger. Humanity was trading 77 warships it could not launch for an alliance with the oldest living civilization ever encountered, its engine science and its standing goodwill. Earth signed in 9 days, the fastest treaty in diplomatic history. And the 77, released from their cradles, unarmed forever, lit their hearts as one and took their first true flight around the curve of the Earth. And every human being on the day side of the planet stopped and watched them pass overhead, a fleet of orphans singing. The 77 found their calling within a year, and it was the one calling nobody had planned and everybody afterward called obvious. Rescue, a Shiffart could feel a distress cry through the resonance bands across half the system, could fly at accelerations that pulped conventional crews, could nurse a cracked habitat in its field grip like a bird carrying an egg. The fleet that would not carry guns became the fleet that came when you screamed. Miners in collapsed shafts on Vesta, a liner losing air around Venus. The Palace Station fire, where Hull 61 held a broken dome together with its own field for 19 hours while the shuttles cycled, humming the whole time. They said later, something that sounded like a lullaby slowed down. In the yards, the work changed. New hulls now, designed around the young from the first rivet, with the searchers' grammar in their bones and crew spaces shaped for partnership instead of command. Human pilots stopped being pilots exactly, and the academies struggled for a word before settling on the one the welders had used from the start. Singers, you did not fly a heart, you sang with it and it carried you. Jonah Petkov turned down the commissions, all of them. He finished his welding certification because his grandfather would have wanted the paper on the wall, and then he took the post that the yardmaster invented for him, and that now has a hall of its own at the academy. First singer of the yards. He teaches welders and admirals in the same classroom, and his first lesson never changes. He plays them the recording from launch day, 77 engines declining in unison, and asks them what they hear. Sabotage, say the admirals. Failure, say the engineers. No, says Jonah Petkov, and turns it up. That is the sound of children trusting you to listen. Everything we were given because we finally did. 11 years after launch day, on a quiet morning shift, the Kenya Ring Tower logged an unscheduled arrival out of deep space, and the duty controller's hands shook as she cleared it, because the transponder code was retired and famous. Hull 44 came up the gravity well slow and easy, the way you approach a place you love. It was not Hull 44 anymore, of course. It had gone out with the searcher's third visit, years before, grown too large for its metal bones, and the yard had opened the old armor for it like a chrysalis in a ceremony that half the planet watched. What came home that morning was 400 meters of living curve and light breath, hull the color of dawn, and down its flank, where its kind carry their names in patterns of luminescence. It wore a shape that resonance analysts had decoded years ago and never told the news feeds, because some things belong to the people they belong to. The pattern was a lullaby from the Balkans, note for note. It took station over the yards where it was built, and it sang down the morning channel, and in the frames of a new hull, an old welder with gray in his beard patched his helmet mic into the resonance band and sang back, terribly, joyfully, the way he always had. The yard crews stopped work to listen. They always do. There is no rule about it. There does not need to be. 77 warships that would not launch. It is the most expensive failure in human history, and the ledger of what it bought grows every year. The engines, the alliance, the rescue fleet. The wolves out in the dark, met twice now, and twice turned back by conventional human squadrons flying with borrowed grammar in their bones. But ask anyone in the yards what launch day really bought, and they will tell you about the morning visits and the song, and they will say it plain. We stopped when a child said no. Everything else was change. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. A new one leaves Earth every day.